Hello, everyone. We are here with Dillana Lim. Mrs. Lim, thank you so much for being here today. Dillana Lim has focused her career on enterprise software and technology. She has led product strategy, product management, product marketing, UX, and development at large companies as well as emerging startups. She was a founding member and vice president for product and engineering at TalentWise. Mrs. Lim helped scale TalentWise to become an award-winning leader within its industry and was instrumental in its successful exit to Sterling Talent Solutions, the world's leading background and identity services provider.
At Sterling Talent Solutions, she served as Chief Product Officer, where she oversaw Sterling's global portfolio of products and services. Mrs. Lim then started working at Versium, a market-leading data provider and predictive analytics company, entering as the COO. Now, she is serving as the CEO of Versium and is committed to guiding the organization through its next stage of growth. Thank you again for speaking with us today, Mrs. Lim. And to just start things off, our first question would be, can you tell us a little bit about why you became interested in technology and business?
So that's a really interesting question because I was not interested in technology or business throughout high school. I started becoming interested in business, mainly economics, as an undergraduate. The thing that really inspired me to learn and understand more about business was actually watching a interview with Warren Buffett many, many years ago. And he was talking to a group of business school students about why he was in business and the problems he was trying to solve. And no other, I think, person at that time had really inspired me into any direction. And so, with that, and I just decided, let's apply to business school. So I started the application process, went into business. I fell into technology, mainly around wireless technology, because Washington State, Seattle's such a hotbed. And I went to University of Washington to get my MBA, and they had a lot of great programs for women in technology and women in telecom. And I took advantage of a lot of those, and that's how I started my career in technology.
That's very interesting because I'm kind of going through that same process where I didn't really think that I'd go into STEM. I thought I would go into law, even though I'd always been interested in STEM. And so it's interesting to hear that. And so my next question is, reading a bit about Versium and the company's B2B2C identity graph, we learned that Versium focuses on assisting enterprises in predictive consumer analysis. So could you talk a bit more about Versium's work and explain the importance of this identity graph?
So it's really interesting in terms of how us, and call us consumers, just everyday people, interact with the things around us. When we talk about Snapchat, Instagram, Google, Facebook, Netflix, all of those things we interact with as consumers, of users of the different products. So we have an identity out there. It's disparate, it's in different places, but it does represent something that is of value. If you are looking to sell someone something, if you are looking to understand a little bit more about things like the spread of COVID, there is a need for us to understand and tie together who a person is for many, many reasons. So what Versium does, specific to a marketing use case, is really help companies understand who their customers are by allowing the ability for us to map from different collection points of data into a single view that helps them service those customers better.
I see.
So, and it's an interesting concept. There are a lot of companies talking about it right now. It is, when it comes to core technology and data, when you talk about big data or data and the use of data in marketing, it really is about the ability for us to pull together different sources of data to really understand how we can do things better.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool, just to bring all of that together is an idea I hadn't really thought of before. That's really cool. And so also Versium is a relatively new company. It founded in 2012, and you began working there in 2018. So could you tell us a bit about your experience taking on an executive role at a newer company?
Well, my background really is in startups and smaller companies. That is where I've always felt the most comfortable. I've always felt I had a bigger impact when it came to smaller companies because you could actually see the things that you did. Right? You could feel the things that you built. And for good or bad, there was always an immediate response from a customer or user in a small company. So I had always been, for me, that had always been my comfort level. I helped grow TalentWise to the point of acquisition, and was part of learn a lot in different companies, and they have established processes, things like that. But for me, I really like working in small teams, and I like watching things grow. And so if you are more entrepreneurial in spirit, if you have that desire, there's something really exciting about being part of a small company that you can help grow. And that's why, I know the founders of Versium, that I've worked with them before for years, and they're doing a really good job helping to scale their business. And what the skill set brought just helped add to the ability for the company to scale.
Right. And I think being able to see like the impact that you personally make is a very powerful thing.
It really is, because when you think about your careers and how much time and effort you spend, whether it is in STEM, like trying to solve a hard engineering problem, a healthcare problem, as an attorney, like watching a case go through, it takes a lot of time, investment, and effort. And what I find is in these small companies that are very agile, you're able to get that response very quickly. Right? It doesn't take a long period of time to go to market and start experiencing that feedback loop.
And so my next question for you would be that you currently serve as the Chief Executive Officer or CEO of Versium, but you started off at this company as the Chief Operations Officer or COO. Could you tell us a bit about this transition of roles? What's the difference between being a COO and a CEO, and how did your work as COO prepare you for the CEO position?
So it's interesting. What you'll find is that CEOs come with a variety of different skill sets. Some come from a finance background, some come from a product engineering background, some come from a marketing background. So whatever skill set you develop through your career, it doesn't preclude you from being a CEO, right? Because every company needs a different type of CEO. And for Versium, it just so happened that the skill sets I brought were the type of skill sets they needed in their next CEO. I come from a product go-to-market engineering background. And so for me, that was my comfort zone. I understood those things well. A lot of people who come from finance, they bring that skill set to the table as CEO. So from my perspective, I was brought on to help with product strategy, help with a go-to-market strategy, which is really about how you get your products in front of customers and ensure that you are developing something that really solves a customer problem. Right? And so there are a lot of iterations involved, a lot of research involved, but that was my background, really helping to start and launch those types of organizations. And as the company as I went along as COO for a few months, it became clear in order to align the corporate goals, it made sense for me to move into the CEO position.
That's really cool. And it's just interesting to hear kind of that idea of, I kind of think of, building up in a company, of course, but like to have different skill sets is also very important to be a CEO. And it's interesting to hear that like you can have these different skill sets and still be a CEO of a company when, like for me, I'm not the biggest into like tech, for example, but had a background in finance, it still could elevate me to.
Many people with backgrounds in finance, legal, and other areas become CEOs. Like every company just needs something different at different periods in time. That's why you see CEOs shift over time as the companies evolve. So it should be something, I think, for women listening to this, young women, it shouldn't be something that they don't think is going to happen, right? There are a lot of great CEOs who have a legal background. A lot have a marketing background. There are CEOs with a consulting background. So it's really about, kind of how much do you want to be kind of where the buck stops, right? Because that's essentially when you're the CEO, that's where the buck stops.
Yeah, I think that's interesting for us to know as well, especially with the high-tech industry being more male-dominated, for females to know, I don't need to just be proficient in math and science. I can also bring in these different skill sets. I feel like that's good to attract more females into the field so that we can have more diversity.
That is the absolute issue with a lot of tech companies now, right? There is a lack of diversity of thought, and there's a lack of diversity in perspective. And I think the broader the skill sets are that you bring to the table when you talk about decision making and corporate governance, the better a company is going to actually do when it comes to serving its customers and serving its shareholders. So I think it's super important that everyone's skill sets can essentially elevate them to whatever level they want, and it shouldn't discount you, right? You have to be good at the things you're good at, right? Like for me, for instance, I've taken programming classes and I am not a good programmer. I'm good in many other things around technology, but I would never say that because I can't code, I shouldn't be in this industry, right? That you can achieve the highest levels in this industry without that. And there are lots of ways around it. There are a lot of ways you can learn. There are a lot of skill sets you bring. But I think that is important, especially for women who want to get into technology. That is not a bar, right? You can actually get very far without that specific skill set.
And I just think that's so important. That is such, I think, for a lot of women, young girls that will be listening to this, I think that's really motivational because, even the tech industry is so based, and for my creativity, how do we create a new and innovative product? And without that diversity, like you were talking about, we just don't have as many perspectives. We can't be as creative of an industry. So I think it's good for young girls to hear that.
It is. And it really is about problem solving. And I think this is where women excel a lot, just in, trying to get through different things in different male-dominated areas. From my experience, the people who do best in technology are people that truly understand kind of how to dissect and solve a problem. Mm-hmm. And they can take it from any angle, right? There are multiple ways to solve a problem, not just one. And that creativity that you're referring to, it really comes to your ability to solve problems, for instance, for a customer, right? That's really what we all strive to do.
Sure. And so kind of continuing this conversation of women and entering into the high-tech industry, as such an inspirational and successful woman, could you talk a little bit about your experience working in a male-dominated industry? And have you always felt your voice has been heard and that your opinions have held as much weight as your male counterparts? And if not, what strategies have you used to overcome and work through these challenges?
Well, I've been fortunate to work in different companies, and, maybe that's by choice, but I've been fortunate to work in different companies where I feel like I have been given opportunities, right? However, I am quite often the only woman still at the table, right? And it's gotten a lot better, but it's something that is, as someone new into a field, and I think a lot of women in technology can attest to this, when I started out, it was very, not just male driven, but, kind of a very male dominant culture, right? And so it was interesting, right? You learn a lot. I listened a lot. I luckily had people in my corner, right, who understood my value to organizations. And the other thing, as you start developing your career, that's even more important than other people understanding your value, is that you understand your own value, right? You understand what you're capable of, you're able to communicate that, and you're also able to question if someone, for instance, chooses not to have you on their team or chooses not to promote you, right? I think things are different. I think in the last 10 years, they're not as good as they should be on all sorts of diversity fronts. But I do believe that women are understanding their value in business in a way they hadn't, in the first 20 years of my career, right? And that's super important, because once you understand your own value, it's up to the other person to accept it. They don't have to, it's not going to impact how you do in life, but people quickly will pick up on confidence. People understand competency. And they value that very, very quickly over, in my experience, over gender. So, like I said, I've been fortunate. I've been in a lot of rooms where I've been the only woman. It's been disheartening at times, especially when it still happens, in 2020, and that's the case. But, my role and all of our roles are to continue to bring women to the table. And that's a really important thing. People get asked me about, mentorship and things like that. And mentorship is a two-way street. Like, there's only so much that I can, advise. The person has to want to ask questions or participate. And if they are offered a seat at the table, even if they don't believe that they're ready or deserve it, they need to take it. And it's because, a guy in the same place would just take it.
Right.
They would never question whether they're ready or whether they have the skill set. They would just have a seat. And so it's the same thing. You get experience by doing things that are hard, that are outside your comfort zone, taking on those chances, accepting failure when it comes. But, I think women sometimes may over-rotate as to whether they're ready for something, they have enough experience for something, am I good enough to do this? Just do it, right? You will know quick enough whether you sink or swim, but it's the act of doing it that actually helps you grow.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up that kind of confidence and self-value. That's something that Nicole and I are part of our larger scheme with this podcast series is going to be to create kind of an organization to help girls get into leadership. And one of our main pillars of that was building confidence, because I think it's something that society doesn't always want women to have, like women to be more passive and to just kind of, sit pretty. But to have that self-value and that confidence to really stand up and to say, no, I do belong at the table.
Yeah. And self-advocating, it's interesting because, it is something that once you start doing it, it becomes second nature. But the first few times it could be challenging, right? It's like, explaining to a teacher that you needed a higher grade, right? It could be explaining to someone when you're applying to college why they should let you in. But the more practice that you get, I think the better you get at it. Right. And self-advocacy also for me is also about realism. Right. I am not going to go into a hospital and say I'm a doctor, because I'm not. Right. I can have all the confidence in the world, but that doesn't suddenly make me a doctor. So it is the whole idea of wrapping everything everything you've learned into something that is really for you kind of a stretch. And for me, I've been lucky in my career where, part of it's working in small companies does this, where you have the ability to advance your career much quicker in a smaller, more dynamic company, right? If you're in a large company, there are, you're competing with 1,000 other people for this promotion. Whereas in a small company, it's, it's essentially you, and it's up to you to continue to do better and better. So it is for folks who are thinking about what to do or what to experience, there are places that actually help train you better for, self-advocacy, quick learning, kind of agile methodologies than others.
I think that's just very, I love hearing from you, such an expert in this field, about that, because that is advice that I hadn't even thought about before. That idea of even starting out your career in a smaller company and just seeing how you're feeling with that, I think that would teach you so many valuable lessons about how much your voice matters and how you have the skill set to make big change in the workforce. So thank you for sharing that advice. It's really
Right. And I think also just this whole general concept of self-advocacy, it's so imperative for females in this industry, because you're talking about how like it's still a bit upsetting when you're the only woman in a room of men. And it's something that we should teach other women to have, because it's just such an imperative skill. And in those times when, you mentioned, am I worthy of this role? Whereas a man could just say, I'm just going to take it. It's just such an important mindset to have.
Exactly. And like I said, for a lot of, I think for a lot of younger women, there are a lot more role models. There are a lot more CEOs of companies. There are a lot more women in venture capital and private equity. There are more women to lead on in terms of examples, which is great. And the one thing is, as you go through this, because I know you guys will most likely over the next few years apply to college and things like that. And I also think it's important for women to know that part of self-advocacy and resilience is that things don't always turn out. Right. When I think through the people that I've worked with that have made the biggest difference in different companies and careers, all of them came from an unexpected place, right? Either a background that wasn't traditional, or, someone gave them a shot, right? And that was the thing they needed, because they had it in there the whole time in them. But nobody just ever gave them a chance. So it also is about, as you move up, looking for that in other people, because in a lot of cases, you can be the big difference and will make a big difference in someone's career just by giving someone an opportunity that may have been passed up, right?
Right. And I think, speaking more about this type of leadership and being a mentor to others, I would like to ask about if you could talk more about your leadership style and what you value the most in your workspace, amongst your coworkers.
Well, I think always in every team, you need to have complementary skill sets, right? Because there is no one person that knows everything or can do everything. There is always a team is best when they fill in each other's gaps and excel in their own unique areas, right? So that's one thing. When I look at teams and I look at how to put teams together, or teams I want to be a part of, I'll say, do I fill in a unique space within this team, right? Because typically when all of that works, the team is able to perform much better than any of the individuals. When I think about, organizations that I've enjoyed working in, I think, it's always, for me, since I've always worked in industries where we have service clients or launch products to customers, it's a customer orientation is very important. Like, what are you trying to do? In addition to, and I said this before, core problem solving skills. Like, can you figure it out? Because when you're a small company, there's a lot of times there isn't a lot of training, and people need to figure things out. They need to be able to solve their own problems and identify not just what to do next, but what to do after that, and then after that, and after that, right? And so there's something about it that for certain people is very instinctive, right? That they just operate that way. And so, for me, as I think through building out teams, it's really looking for those folks who are just able to solve out of the box problems, because they instinctively just know how to break them down and just, essentially, for lack of a better term, just go after it bit by bit. And so, when I think about folks that I enjoy working with, that's always core to it. Just because, I like working in small companies, and the nature of small companies attracts those types of people.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think team building is also such an important skill, as we become older and become leaders more in our fields. Learning how to build a team and how, like, what we need in a team also is really important. And I guess with that, I know we've kind of talked about mentorship already, but I was just wondering, as you've been so successful, you've said that you've had some mentors and sponsors that have aided you in the journey. Can you talk a bit more about people?
Yeah.
And
like I said, I've been fortunate that I've worked with folks who have been very impactful when it's come to my career decisions. One person in particular that I still believe was one of the most impactful people in my career was a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer I worked with early on in my career. I was right out of business school, and I was doing, product marketing for a company. And, I helped develop a lot of different business cases and did a lot for the company. But, I was fairly young, so I hadn't understood on my own the impact of what I had done. And so, I remember at one point in time, I was passed up for an opportunity. And I actually didn't even think about it because it was something I hadn't applied for, and it was interesting and a natural progression for me, but it was just something that I did not advocate for because I didn't even think about it. Mm-hmm. And so the CTO noticed this right away, and he called me into his office, and he sat me down and said, "Do you realize just what happened?" And I said, "No." Like, I was doing my job. I was happy with what I was doing. And he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, "If I were you, I'd be really pissed off right now." Mm. And then he explained to me what had happened. And a lot of it happened behind the scenes. But what was interesting about it was he had a very male perspective on what happened. My perspective wasn't that. Mm. But what it did very quickly was it oriented me to how I need to start thinking about things, right? That I had just accepted something that I should not have accepted. And I accepted it because I trusted the people who I was working with at the time. When I was, told that, what was interesting about that is not only did him and I have a really good conversation about it, but then he moved me on to his team directly. So I was a direct report of his, and I was very young. Because I think he saw in me potential. Mm-hmm. And I think he also understood that he didn't want to risk that outside of his leadership. Mm-hmm. And, and I thrived under him, and I still remember kind of him as a mentor. And it really took that for someone to actually tell me something that, when I was, like I said, I was very young in my career, but it took someone to just tell me, "You should be pissed off," when I wasn't. Where I thought twice about how am I approaching my career, and am I advocating enough? Am I doing enough for myself? Because this happened, and I was aware. But what that did is it immediately changed a lot of my instinct when it came to jobs and roles. And like I said, it was one of, from my perspective, the most impactful discussions I've had with someone who was a mentor. And we kept in touch for years. And he was, like I said, he was just one of those people there was nothing in it for him other than to help people make sure that they fulfilled, right, their potential. And so, when I think about that, and I think about the people I talk to, the team members I've had over the years, a lot of it is making sure that they understand where their talent and potential really is. Because I think a lot of people are so close to it, they don't understand when they're good at something. They really don't. And you have to let them know that, you know what, I've had this, and, you've done something that no one else has done, right? To just give people the honest feedback. Or you were able to do something in a way that we've been trying to achieve for years and never could. And that is the type of feedback people need to hear to understand and know when they're good at something. Because being good at something is really, when you're thinking about career, that is where you double down, right? The things that you're good at, the things that you feel good about. When the things you're good at, the things you feel good about, and the things other people value all come together, that's when your career skyrockets.
Right.
And can you talk a little bit about how you have gone about finding those mentors or trying to network so that you have those people in your life that can help propel, and then how you now, as such an incredible leader, have done that for other people, have become a mentor or sponsor to other people?
So it's interesting because I've never actually asked anyone to mentor me. I think it's come naturally within a work environment. I always try to take advantage of situations where people who know more than I am are willing to sit down and talk with me. Mm-hmm. I think that's very important because, mentors can come in all shapes and sizes. It's not really about who has a role bigger than yours. I mean, I've been mentored in so many ways by people who work for me because they taught me how to manage better, right? They told me things that they either liked about how I managed or didn't like about how I managed, right? I've been mentored by a lot of customers where, based on their feedback, not only of me at the companies, but of the companies I worked at, we were always able to get things better. So I think, part of it is not assuming a mentor comes in a specific package is one thing. And the other thing is to just be open to it because it takes a lot of conversations with someone before something resonates. And you hear something you hadn't heard before. And that's typically where I will just, ask to speak to them again, right? Mm-hmm. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily come in the package that you think. A lot of times I wouldn't call it mentorship, but just learnings. Like you learn a lot based on how you don't want to be, right? And so that, there's a lot of, helping guide by example, the things you want to do and how you want to be treated and what you want to do in your career. But there's a lot that you can absorb based on, I don't want to be like that person. That person makes people feel bad. Or, this isn't the kind of person I want to be. And so it's just, kind of absorbing what's around you and being open to the discussions.
And I think, I was just going to say, I think that this also draws importance to this overarching topic of the importance of diverse perspectives. Mm-hmm. How you're talking about, not a mentor doesn't always have to be your step up. It could be a step down. It could be a customer. It just has to be someone who you can learn from a different perspective. And that ties into what we were talking about earlier. We were talking about how, CEOs don't necessarily have to have one type of background. And so just this important idea of having different backgrounds is really important.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yep. Oh, no. What were you saying? Sorry, I did not.
Oh, no, I think different backgrounds, different experiences is key. I had the good fortune to work for a company that had a lot of overseas employees. And, prior to that, I'd worked in fairly US-centric or North America-centric places. But the minute you work for a company that is truly a global company, your perspective on everything changes. Your perspective on work changes. Your perspective on who your customer is changes. Your perspective on, work-life balance changes, right? Simply because you are experiencing more. And, for young women who are starting out in their careers, really, as you kind of take that risk or start experiencing things that are outside of your comfort zone, you grow and learn very, very quickly. And, so like my best experiences, both personally and professionally, have always been, learning something outside of what I was raised with here in the US.
I just think it's so cool to think about that, just that open-mindedness. I think that's so important to be bringing into the workforce, and such good advice to hear. Just that open mind, as you were saying, to the mentors, and just things that you can learn. There are so many conversations to be had in the workforce and in the field. You just have to be open to that.
Right. And so I know we've talked a little bit about this, how we see, more women in executive positions now, as we're applying to college, but there's still progress to be made. And so my next question is, how do you envision the evolution of women's representation in the high-tech industry? And which steps do you hope to see the tech industry take to further this cause?
So it's really interesting because, when you look at the people who go to college and graduate from college, it's always majority women. Even when I went to college, right, it was starting to get up there where it was equal, or there were always a little more women than men. But then you look 10, 15, 20 years down the line, and female representation has dropped.
Right.
I think a lot of that is based on, naturally there's kind of this, an old boys network, I call it that is slowly going away, slowly, but it is slowly starting to move toward more open network. But there is still, the reality that in a lot of situations, women are still the main caregivers, especially when they have children, right? There used to be a concept called off-ramping, right? Where a woman who had a child or children would essentially step back from their career and off-ramp, kind of take a slower road, then get back on the highway later. And, in a lot of ways, that's why there aren't as many female leaders, because I think a lot of women felt that that's what they needed to do. I think with more gender equality, with the definition of what a family is and who needs to run a family shifting, we are starting to see less women do that are in positions to move into CEO roles. But the reality is, childcare is very expensive for a lot of folks. Like when you talk about, certain industries like tech, they can afford it. When you talk about other industries, childcare is still very prohibitive as a cost. And then it becomes who stays home or who's supposed to take care of the baby situation. That's one thing I noticed is starting to shift. I think there is more equality. I do not believe that anyone doubts any longer a mother's ability to focus and work. I strongly believe that. I'm a huge proponent of that, having gone through that. But we had mothers that work here, and it's definitely, there's an aspect of it where every employee, regardless of whether they have children or not, I have people who have dogs that need extra time to take off, right? Everyone has a personal life they need to balance. Everyone has things going on outside of work that impact them and that they make choices about. And I think from a work-life balance perspective, I think we're starting to see a lot more shifts in that. I actually think with the pandemic and a lot of people working from home, it's actually really forcing that, right? It's forcing interactions, like day-to-day interactions that may not have existed. I mean, I know when my kids were young, they would be in daycare all day or with a nanny. And I know a lot of moms now get to spend that time at home. Granted they have to work and teach their kids at the same time, but it's just a different, it continues to evolve. So that is one thing when I think through ways that we can make, where we can make women's roles more equal. It's not just as CEOs and in business, but it has to be equal across all facets of life, because that's really the thing that is going to encourage women to continue with their careers. And it's going to be interesting, because I think a lot of the issues, I think decade over decade, it shifts, right? There are a lot of women working right now, many in professional fields. Balance is coming. I think there's a lot more recognition in terms of the challenges of managing a home life and a business life throughout, your 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I think businesses are responding, which is hopeful. Because when that happens in mass, that's when you're going to start seeing kind of a very different corporate America, right?
That totally makes sense. And do you think that can that shift come from organizations and businesses kind of maybe pushing different policy around, maternity leave and things like that? Do you think that can come from companies, or do you think it's more just?
Oh, I think it's going to come from companies. And I think a couple things is like women need a seat at the table. They need to be on boards. A lot of the things that people are talking about when it comes to, for instance, Black Lives Matter, women have also indicated that those are the things that change situations. When groups are represented in leadership roles, that will change situations. First of all, there's a diversity of thought. And it also sets a very, very strong example of what a business stands for and who they will believe in, right? And so, I know there are a lot of initiatives. Martha is a perfect example. She's on multiple boards right now to get female leaders on boards, to get female leaders in the boardroom and in, executive suites. Because once that happens visibly, it changes the nature of how people work. It becomes normal, right? It becomes normal to see a woman in that role. I was fortunate to have a female CEO at the last company that I worked for at Sterling. And, she was an amazing, operationally oriented CEO. She did quite a bit for the organization. But she also, to her credit, understood her role bringing more women on to the C-suite. And so under her, there was a shift. And it was a great shift to see where there was, approaching equality that she was managing when it came to the C-level. But it takes a leader. It doesn't have to be a female leader. It has to be a leader that understands that is how you do it. Change doesn't start from the ground up necessarily. It can start at the top, because that is where everyone aims to begin with. And I think as you guys have your mentors and you think of the different female leaders there are such strong women in different areas. You mentioned, law before, right? There are, you look at the Supreme Court and the women on the Supreme Court that are very strong, very persuasive, very smart. And I would guarantee for any attorney now, they would never think that they were not able to get to the Supreme Court simply because those are such public figures. Right? And so I think when that happens and people see people like them publicly running large institutions, companies, governments, charitable organizations, it changes the nature of what they think they're able to accomplish.
And this idea of representation, it's so essential because it ties back into what we discussed earlier around, having self-confidence. Because when you see other women and you can say, oh, maybe I can do that because they're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's that. There's definitely the whole idea of, how many doors, because as you advance in your career in life, right, it's about how many doors can be opened up for you. And the more women you see go through those doors, they all become possibilities, right? They all become possibilities to the point where, hopefully in, another 10 years or 20 years, we won't even be talking about it, right? There'll be another problem to deal with, but this will hopefully be solved by your generation.
And I think that ties really well into our last question. Do you have any final advice for our young female listeners? And what is important to understand as they step into higher education and these industries?
It's interesting because I think the one thing that I think a lot of people who break new ground or who want to try new things, experiences, there will be folks who doubt you, right? They may be in a position to impact your career, but they always exist. And I think there is much more strength in the people that believe in you. And so it's really, really important, I think, to surround yourself with people who have the same goals and aspirations, because you really help reinforce what you're capable of doing. And I think that's really important because a lot happens throughout your career and throughout your life. And to have good, positive energy and people who believe in what you're capable of doing really pulls you through a lot. The other thing that I think is really important, and you mentioned STEM before, is I think in a lot of ways women need to kind of embrace the more quantitative side of themselves, right? I think that everyone has core capabilities there, but I have to tell you, like if you are, for instance, the business world, the more you know about things like finance, numbers, statistics, the further you will get. Right. And it's not to say that that needs to be your area of focus. You could be a super creative person, but that vernacular and knowing that lexicon is very, very important. And I remember, chatting with my finance professor from UW, and it's interesting. I remember taking her class and thinking, I'm not going to go to finance, so I don't need to really pay attention. I'm not going to be going into finance. It is the material I use the most on a day-to-day basis, because the rest of the stuff I can figure out comes more naturally. But finance, knowing how businesses work, knowing how money works, right? Even knowing how the stock market works, just important life skills to have. And I think sometimes women just don't focus on those things. And I think focusing on not, having them as your career, but not being scared of them is very, very empowering. It really is, because it helps you understand a lot of how things work. And the more you understand something and look it in the eye, the less scary anything is, right? So that would be kind of my recommendation. I mean, I think super exciting times right now. I think, I don't know who's planning on going to college next year, but over the next few years, as people start doing that again and going off to college, there's so much opportunity right now when it comes to just learning things and being part, being a global citizen. And so, it's like, don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of the unknown. Understand yourself and what you're good at. And make sure you surround yourself with the people who truly, truly want the best for you. Right. Because that all makes a huge, huge difference.